her grandfather was a converso, which back in the days of the Spanish Inquisition, if you were a Jew and you wanted to survive, you converted to Christianity. And the way you had to go through that was you got marched through the town, people threw stones at you and your family, all your kids, everything. And you had to go into every chapel and every church and, lay yourself, prostrate yourself and say, I'm nothing and I'm converting. And he did this in order to save his family. And Teresa, his granddaughter, her mother, she was married at the age of 14 and died in childbirth at the age of 30 after having, I don't know, oodles of kids, maybe 9 or more. And and Teresa, I think, decided she was a wild child and bringing gossip upon the family, because could only have been that maybe she was connecting with boys without having a chaperone, which in those days would have been a horrible thing. But at any rate, her dad put her in a local convent for a while till the gossip died down. And she found out she liked it. Probably thought it was better than marriage and dying in childbirth at the age of 30. But anyway, she then went on to lead this very interesting life of one who found herself surrounded by laziness and complete loss of the sense of what a monastery could be, which she felt was a life of simplicity and a life of prayer. And she would see other nuns, bursting into tears at the sight of, the crucified Christ and the images. And she'd say she couldn't squeeze a single tear out of her eye. She just didn't think she fit into that picture at all. But eventually she began to have these raptures and connections through hearing voices, God's voice speaking to her. And in some cases, like when she was in choir one day and was singing, the other nuns were staring at her and pointing at her, and she looked down and realized she was 7 or 8 inches off the floor. She had levitated. And she says to God, put me down, because she's embarrassed, to be seen doing this. And so she set out to reform the Carmelite monastery and set up new monasteries with a way of life that was far more devoted to this life of simplicity, the vows, and prayer. So she was not only one that had these mystical experiences in prayer, she was a reformer. She was out on the road. And in fact, and a very down-to-earth person. She was, she would be criticized by her fellow sisters for how much she enjoyed her food when she was eating, as if you're not supposed to. That's a thing of the body. You're supposed to give up the body. And she'd say, when you pray, you pray. When you eat partridge, you eat partridge. And so on the road one day, going out to set up her monasteries, her carriage that carried all the provisions, they had to forge a river, and the river washed away all the provisions, and she's sitting under a tree. And God is speaking to her, and she says, well, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few. Because God was saying, this is how I treat my friends, And so I'm listening to all of this, and I'm just going to check she lived always in fear of the Spanish Inquisition, because her experiences were such that drew attention to her. And so therefore, they would want to look at her and see if she was a heretic, putting on this big show, So she constantly had to make self-deprecating statements like, I am just a stupid woman. I'm only a worm. And things that when feminists read her work, they didn't like that, because they're looking at it from a particular point of view. And Mirabai Starr explains she had to make sure that she was safe among these priests who were seeking out any little thing that would give them an excuse to call her a heretic. And so she would write in such a way as if, I don't deserve this, but this is what happened, but I don't deserve it. And so I was very impressed with this woman who was really trying to liberate people from the church's constrictions on them as to how they could be connected to God. Because, and this goes right up to current times, you're supposed to go up the chain of command, kind of like in the army. You don't go to the general, you go to your commanding officer first. And in this case, it was you go through your priest, then the bishop, then the pope. You don't go to God directly. You wouldn't want to bother God directly. So she was liberating people from that idea by saying that there's no place that the beloved one, the Holy One, would want to be except in the most beautiful and radiant garden of your soul. And so she was giving people permission that if they wanted to be in contact with God, they just had to go within. This was challenging that whole hierarchical setup. And so the next crumb, and I know this is all very Catholic, everybody, so just hang with me here. The next crumb was the Vatican Council of the 60s that dropped in, because I was thinking that's what the Vatican Council was trying to do. All those beautiful documents telling people about the primacy of their own conscience over anybody else's authority, about the importance of the concept of the priesthood of the laity. Can you imagine the priesthood of the laity? That kind of levels the playing field on this hierarchy stuff. And a lot more like that. So the encouragement of religious communities to update themselves, to examine who they were, their original charisma, how they define themselves, but bring it into the modern world. And of course, my next crumb after that that's what the IHMs wanted to do. The Immaculate Heart Sisters, of which I was a member during those exact years of 63 to 69. And I was thinking about how we read those documents and had so many meetings and discussions and tried to come to some consensus about what changes would be made. And having made those decisions, which included finally, eventually shedding the habit and wearing regular clothes, this did not sit well with Cardinal McIntyre, the local, head of the diocese, who kind of in a lot of ways reminded me of the Spanish Inquisition guys, because we were all investigated. We were all subject to their inquisition during the entire time that I was in that community, from the first year I was there on through to the end. And finally, to the point where they were forced to make a choice between giving up everything they had decided to do to go forward, to modernize, or to absolutely have to leave religious life. And while a few kind of stayed, with traditional ways, the rest left en masse. This was huge. They formed their own lay community in place of it. So there was all of this pain and process with trying to be open to what they felt the Holy Spirit was saying to them, as Teresa was being open to these invasions of her soul by the divine, so to speak, her relationship to the one she called the beloved, and all of the challenge that she had with the surrounding authorities. And it even brought me to be thinking about our Uncle Bill, Lynn, Father Bill Skian, who was a Vatican II priest and who set up his parish where they would all help one another and help the poor. And they had many programs for this. And when he was retiring, a contingency of his parish went to the bishop and said, please send us someone like him. We want to keep this going. And the bishop sent someone who came in and dismantled everything that he had done. And he went into a depression. And I was out visiting at some point. And I was talking with him. At this point, his health is not too good. He's using a cane, and he says, Pat, I think I'm losing my faith. And I was thinking about how this is what happens to us. This is what breaks us open, are these things that we strive so hard for, and then someone comes in to crush it. And in the crushing of it, there's that point where you wonder, why am I doing this? What is this all for? And then something good comes out of it. It just seems to work that way, but it may not be right away. So having gone through this with the IHMs, I was brought to the current crumb, the current breadcrumb. I hope you're okay with how long this story's going. And that is the having walked side by side with Shawnee Smith for 20 years during her attempt to make the documentary about the Immaculate Heart story, which is called Rebel Hearts. And having, oh, you put it right up in there, didn't you? Okay, there it is. All right. So the documentary is made, but she went through, I was there through 20 years of it. I think it's more like 21 or 22 when she first started it. And in the beginning, there was all this openness and hospitality because these were the original group who had gone through this whole process. And she got their stories through interviews and recordings and such. And then a producer was very interested in helping her get it out there. And so then there was that whole story. And it was a story of pain and process, because there were times when the doors were open to her with the community. And there were times when they slammed the door in her face. And there were times when she thought, why am I doing this? Why am I even trying? What's the point? The community, I thought I was telling the great story of who are they now, you know? And so finally the story, you know, with the documentary was made, and there was a lot of pain and process in that as well. And all I could think of through all of this was how going back to Teresa of Avila and how she sat there probably covered in mud and water from the river saying, is this how you treat your friends? And then thinking about Mom, who was an aspiring actress who got married and had 9 kids, and many times must have thought, is this how you treat your friends? And my Uncle Bill and what he went through, and how his whole all that he strived for, they undid it. And his only hope was, he said, I can die now because Francis is Pope. And, you know, he felt like there was some hope for the world. And then, you know, just thinking about my own experience in the IHMs and the terrible disillusionment of having such joy and such hope and such excitement about the creative act of Vatican II and how creative we were being, and to have it crushed, you know, by the hierarchical power, the powers that be. And looking at what Shawnee went through, and it was difficult, believe me, because I was the confidant. I was the person she shared all the stories of pain with. And it was hard to hang in there and listen to it day after day. And I would wonder, is she going to get through this? Is this worth it? You know, and all of that. And yet here we are. So it's always, it seems like this is my story, and it, you know, it's not someone else's story here. This is my particular breadcrumb story. But it is such a story that is so similar for so many people. If 500 years ago, Teresa of Avila was going through this, and now here we are going through it, whether it's in our personal lives or in our country or in the world. This is the story of reaching for the heavens, but having your feet in the mud and having to just keep going, knowing that somehow God is in all this, and somehow this breaking open is what is going to allow something good to happen.